Welcome to Inspiring Perspectives, a podcast by thinkPARALLAX featuring fresh takes and bold ideas for the real-world sustainability challenges and solutions at some of the world's most respected brands and companies. I'm your host, Derek Sabori, and this is what sustainability sounds like today. All right, well, hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Welcome to Inspiring Perspectives. If you haven't been here before, I'm Derek Sabori, and today I'm here with Alyscia Raines. She's a workplace culture strategist and CEO at ADR Consulting Group. Alyscia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And, I can tell this is going to be really fun because my cheeks already hurt from smiling. So we're having a good time.
Perfect. Yeah, we're going to have a great time. We had a prep call that was really fun and engaging, so I'm excited to try to pull some of those topics out. To our listeners today, it's really likely that they have a program that's focused on supporting people in their organization. And that's kind of at the heart of our conversation, right? So if you're listening out there, I know that your team wants to really feel heard. They want to feel recognized. They want to feel like they're included, part of the team, like they belong there at the company. And that's at the heart, I think, of DEI, right? Alyscia, that's what we're going to talk to you about. But the more that this happens, the better those people feel, the more likely they are to perform, the longer they stay there at the company, the stronger ambassador they become for the brand and company. Yeah. Those are all the benefits of this program, right?
That's it.
So tell us a little bit about ADR Consulting. What do clients come to you for?
Yeah, that's such a good one. So again, what a pleasure. I'm so grateful to just be able to share this space. And really grateful for the invitation. So ADR Consulting Group, we are a workplace culture strategy and consulting firm. And essentially what we're hoping to do in our mission is to help our clients to honor the humanity and dignity of people at work, which sounds pretty simple, right? But if you've worked anywhere before, you know that that is probably not as simple as it sounds. And so, yeah, our work really falls into a couple of buckets. And so the support that we offer is around executive coaching, something we call people analytics, which might include engagement surveys or climate surveys, but certainly also more qualitative types of study like one-on-one interviews and focus groups, all to better understand kind of the state of DEI or the state of equity and inclusion, if you will, within an organization. We do a lot of workshop trainings, which we love. And then lastly, we also do a lot of work around strategic planning. So taking our ideas or our goals around equity and inclusion work and helping folks to put that into an action-oriented and strategic roadmap, if you will, for years to come, because we think that's really important. So that's kind of the work that we do and what people will come to us for. And we meet folks in a myriad of ways. Sometimes it's through good word of mouth. We love that method when we have referrals to come our way. We do a lot of work in the nonprofit space as well as private corporations, education. It really doesn't matter the industry and background. Again, our ideal client is an organization who is pretty much at their nascent or intermediate phase of this work, and they're kind of looking for a boost up, or where do we go next? How can we get some further support with this work? And so we'll jump in and help them from there.
Well, I know we have a tendency to just sort of wrap all this up into just DEI, we call it, right? Yeah. It's no secret, I think, that this work is not simple anymore. And in fact, I think people are sort of on the fence. It's never been simple, but it really does feel like DEI, or at least the term, has really become sort of a third rail topic. So I'm wondering, I know you have an interesting perspective on this, like how did we get here? And what are you seeing? How are you seeing this space evolve? So maybe let's just start with, how did we get to this point where it was something that was so celebrated and now it's something that people are worried or concerned about? Do they need to be? Give us a little background.
Yeah. There's so many things, right, when it comes to kind of the evolution of what equity and inclusion work has looked like. But I think one thing that I think is pretty prevalent right now is there's a lot of naysayers. There are a lot of folks who are kind of in opposition. There are a lot of folks who are critiquing this work. And I would actually venture to say that that's not new. And this is not the first time that that's happening. But I think what instead we're noticing is that due to a couple of other conditions of where we're at right now in our socio-political climate, be that we are entering in a space with a presidential election coming up, being that we are post-COVID, depending on who you're talking to, but I would debate the post, right? But we are in a post kind of that first wave of COVID happening in that era and its implications on the way we do work. Certainly, as we've seen a resurgence and a continuation around justice issues that are happening in our country and abroad, there are just so many things, right? So many forces at bay. So I think what we've noticed is there are more voices that are kind of in opposition of this work. They've always been there. So I would say that's the first thing I would identify about the times we're in right now. If you hear the naysayers louder, it's just that the microphone has gotten bigger, but not that their voices have gotten any more louder or that they are new in their critiques. But so many things to say. What else about the way?
Well, I was gonna say, so it's nothing new. I guess my first question is just sort of like, why are there naysayers? Like, I think when we first heard about DEI, it was, like I said, it was really exciting. It was like, this makes sense. I think when you kind of reframe it in terms of recognizing people, a place where humanity and dignity are there for employees, like that just makes good sense. What do you think then? Why are there naysayers? What's the pushback, if you will, especially on the business side?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things have kind of led to this moment. And I think one, for many organizations, their journey or pathway into equity and inclusion work didn't start in 2020, but certainly that was a pivotal moment where many organizations did kind of first take their steps or first have a moment of reckoning or awakening, if you will, that equity and inclusion was just a topic that couldn't be ignored, right? And due to COVID, due to the murder of George Floyd and many other factors, there were certain conditions at that point in time that kind of led them to that journey. But not to say that that was an organization's first time. I know plenty of clients who have been doing this work for 20 plus years. But I think there was energy, right? There was energy in a new way that we hadn't seen before, where folks were forced to answer and to ask questions about their own policies, their own procedures, that really drilled down to, are we in fact an inclusive place of work? Are we in fact doing and conducting business in a way that represents and mirrors the given populations that we're catering or that we're selling to or that are consumers of us, right? And so having to ask some of those hard questions, maybe in the first time in spaces where we notice a lot of orgs have their first journey or their first tipping of a toe, if you will, into this space. And I think for the naysayers, what happened is that there was more prominence, more attention, and more money put particularly into this work. So maybe it was into trainings, right? Maybe it was into developing employee resource groups, or also supplementally creating ESG policies and procedures, which I know that taps into your work as well. But I think kind of where folks are getting this, the naysayers, right? What their origin is one, the level of attention, the level of resources that have been reallocated and shifted in the way that traditional business models looked post or before 2020 rubs them the wrong way. I think there's something mentally as well that some folks feel like they're losing or missing out on, when it really is about a shift in who's centered and prioritized. It's really looking critically at our places of business and interrogating, are we doing business in a fair way? Are we doing business in a just way? And if we can make shifts in our pivots in the way we do business or way we allocate resources or opportunities or jobs to better be in alignment with our mission, especially if we have goals around inclusion and equity and fairness, then we owe it to our stakeholders to do so. But as the saying goes, when some folks are centered, some folks will not be centered. And I think that's kind of toddlers in a corner pouting and doing tantrums because they don't like it personally. That's a little bit of it. I'm sure there are other factors, but that's a little of it.
That's a good place to start. And I think what we're seeing, I know from us on our side, when we're working with clients, we're definitely seeing that our clients are not shying away from this work. Like you said, many of them have been working on it for years, and we've kind of changed the way we phrase it or the name that we call it. But in fact, they're not, even with those naysayers, they're actually perhaps even strengthening their programs. But we do see and hear about companies and brands sort of rebranding it, fine-tuning the language a little bit, the approach, maybe the numbers that they're sharing or following. You called this, when we spoke, a new wave of DEI. Like there's this new attitude behind it. What are you seeing, and what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think something that sticks out to me, that as loud as the noise might be against DEI work, there is probably equally, if not more, on the other side with organizations who are really doubling down on their commitments around diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And for those folks who are choosing to continue on this pathway forward, I think I would call this new wave, if you will, doing what needs to be done to continue the work, right? Because the truth of the matter is that an investment in people being our employees, our most valuable asset, is always good business. To ensure that folks have a workplace environment where they don't experience bias, harm, discrimination, those are the bare minimums, right? But to go above and beyond that and to ensure folks feel like their voice matters within the organization and that they can see themselves reflected in the organization's representation of leadership positions and that they feel there are pathways for advancement. When we think about what it means in a commitment to DEI, like those are the things. And so when we talk about this new wave, I think it really means how can we continue forward with this work in a way where we can shield ourselves from the shenanigans, from the naysayers, from the voices out that are happening outside. And so for some teams, what we see is that they're choosing to rebrand their DEI work, right? And they're choosing to call it something different. Or they might not be announcing every single initiative that they have on their social channels. They're still happening, but maybe the way that they're communicating is in a different way. And I'm going to say no knock to the organizations who are choosing to pivot in a way that makes most sense to them as we move through this moment, because there are so many uncertainties. And if the commitment is truly to continue path forward in this work, then it's kind of like, let's do what needs to be done. And we don't need to sing up from the rooftops what we're doing to prove ourselves, because we know the impact we're making. And I can respect that.
And you've mentioned, prior to that statement, you were talking about tying it back to the business, sort of making sure it serves the business. So there's two things I want to touch on that, because I would imagine that also is new and fresh, right? We're not just doing this because it is the right thing to do. It feels good. Sure. It's good for the business. And if you're a business doing this, essentially everything you need to do needs to serve the business. Yeah. And in fact, I know you made a pivot as well, just in terms of your, language as well. So let's start with the tying it to the business. Why is that so important?
I love that. So two things there, the significance of tying equity and inclusion work back to the business, and then our own story. If it's okay with you, I'll flip it and I'll tell our own story about how we needed to pivot for the sake of making our work go and flow in a better way. So I started ADR Consulting Group 5 years ago. And at that time of our founding, we called ourselves a DEI agency or a DEI consulting firm. And, that was a little bit before 2020 happened. So that was back in 2019. And at that moment, we were able to get business and it was fine and folks understood the work. But as we moved into kind of this big movement around kind of what DEI work looked like in 2020, the calls, the asks were mostly around workshop trainings, and not just any workshop training, but particularly two topics: bias and microaggressions. So I would constantly get calls and asks, hey, can you do that microaggression training for us? Can you do that bias training for us? Certainly that was within our scope of capabilities and capacity. My team has decades of experience in facilitating and content development, instructional design, and that's within our wheelhouse. But I would also be trying to enter into conversations and ask those same folks, tell me how this particular service is going to connect back to your overall mission and vision of your business, of the organization. Yeah. And I would get puzzled looks and folks would be like, why are you asking me that? Like, I kind of just want the workshop. Can we just do the workshop?
We just got to check this off the list, right?
Trying to get this workshop done. I heard, XYZ's company is doing this. This is what's on the news cycle right now, that this is what we should be doing. And so I think what that moment of time taught me is that we were ahead of the curve in this notion and understanding that certainly in that moment, that was a choice, and that was certainly an avenue to delve into learning and development. And I'm a big proponent of L&D. But at the same time, if we're not coupling those conversations around raise of consciousness and awareness with real action-oriented steps, as well as how this is going to, again, fulfill the mission of our business, then we've done the work a disservice. And so the other thing that happened with my company is I ended up moving personally, like my family and I moved from one state to another. And the state we moved to, then in turn, had some pretty stark executive orders and legislations that came out around DEI work. And so quite literally, my business was in jeopardy. The clients I was working with could no longer fund the programs and services that we were offering. And so it just made sense for us to shift And so we started calling ourselves a workplace culture consulting firm because that really spoke to the way in which I see this work. We are working to build a workplace culture where folks experience true semblances of feeling belongingness and inclusion. Like I said earlier, we are on a mission to honor the humanity and dignity of people at work. And while that might sound easy, what we notice is that many teams, many leaders and managers still don't have the skill sets on how to lead, how to aspire, how to encourage, how to not freaking microaggress your team, right? And it's not because they don't care, it's not important, but because those skill sets, those soft skills, as they call them, aren't taught. And meanwhile, the impact is people are leaving right out the door, attrition's high, productivity's low, engagement's low. You can't figure out why people don't want to return, right? And one of them is because we haven't taken the time to look and really examine our workplace culture, because that's how we do better business. When our folks are feeling like they have their needs met and have their interests taken advantage of, our employees can be our biggest ambassadors, like you said. So we pivoted our language, one out of necessity, but it was actually a little bit more because it positioned us in a better way to talk about the comprehensive nature in which we see this work. So that's a little bit of our origin story on kind of how we made a pivot personally around language and how we titled our work.
I want to stick on that for a minute before we go back to tying it to the business. I think that we'll get there organically. But even for companies who do pivot then with their message, right? I guess what I'm hearing you say is like nothing to be ashamed of, because I could imagine some companies like, man, I really want to stay strong on this, but I'm getting pushback. It's almost like doing the right thing to your point, to protect the program, protect your progress. If you've got to make some concessions, seems like you're okay with that, and that seems like the right thing to do, just as long as you can protect the work. Is that right?
As long as you can protect the work, but I also think as long as you're being intentional about the why. And
I love that.
I'm a small business owner, right? And so I'm able to make decisions and have a really clear understanding of how it impacts every single aspect of my business, the people I work with, the people I work in support and service of, and all of those different aspects. And so I'm not saying that this is an easy aspect of this work for a Fortune 5, even a mid-size and other small company. But what I am saying is if that is a decision that's going to be made to pivot our messaging or the language that we're utilizing, I don't care what we're calling the work. I'm actually more concerned about what the work looks like. I'm really hoping, and I'm working with clients to ensure that if you're calling yourselves inclusive, well, let's look down and drill down on your practices. We talk a lot about hiring because that's usually where we see the most processes that are just riddled and laden with bias, right? So let's interrogate that, because whether you're calling it an EDI, a JEDI, a DEI, an IDEA, whatever the acronym you're putting behind the work, there should be some semblance of intentionality. But even more so important, it should be palpable. It should be very clear to understand how that naming device is actually it's actualized within the organization, right? And when you look at the employees and when you ask them those questions about their experiences, they had better line up. That's what I'm interested in interrogating, not what cute name are you titling your program today. So that would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's very important. I know when we were talking about this the other day, you brought up this idea of dissonance, right? And that's one of the things that you see, and it's really problematic, right? If everybody in your sustainability report on your website, if you're talking about fairness and equity and being a great employer, but when you talk to employees, they're like, what? Like, I don't feel that. I don't see it. I don't hear that. That's probably the worst thing you can do. Talk about, crushing morale and just not being good for the business, right?
Absolutely. I would even take it one step further, and I would say you're actually causing harm, right? When we talk to employees, so, whether it be my own experience and countless other stories of folks that I've worked with alongside of in my own network, in my community, but certainly even, when we hear client stories, they'll say, I really believed, right, when I saw that brochure or that pamphlet or that statement on the job description that this is what their beliefs and commitments were. I really believed that's what I was walking into. But the second I got here, it became very clear that that's not the lived experience, right? And so while we might put nice commitments on websites and post them in public spaces, if your employees are experiencing a different version, right, of that story, then the impact is harmful. The impact feels like you have been almost bamboozled, right? Like I looked at your brochure and your pamphlet, and it demonstrated that there is a commitment to even thinking about diverse representation within the business in all levels throughout. But when you look further down and you look at the demographics and you see that only folks who are let's say white male and cisgender are at leadership position, and any other marginalized community or any other marginalized demographic and identity has no other semblance of representation at the top. But yet your pamphlets had pictures of smiling faces with all ability types, right? And talking about like, we celebrate pride, and you're playing and sponsoring floats for pride parades. But then also you look at your policy, right? And your parental leave policy doesn't cover folks who are in same-sex relationships. Like, there's a problem. There's a problem there. And so that disconnect quite literally causes harm. And so that's why I think we spend probably a little bit too much energy focusing on the title and not necessarily on the work that's being done. And I think what I'm on a mission to do with my team and my firm is to help ensure that who we are espousing to be is the actual lived experience. And if it's not, that's okay. But let's take steps to close that gap.
Yeah, and be intentional with it. I like that. And I'm imagining you said it does harm to that employee or that potential employee, but also to the company itself, right? There's risk reputation there. And if that word starts to get out, bad mouthing starts to happen, that's just bad for your company, your brand. What are some other reasons of why it's important to really tie this to your business and not just have it as sort of an offshoot just so that you can say you've got a DEI or a people program like this?
I think when you chat with folks who are in the DEI space, I think it's always really cool and really helpful to ask them, well, kind of what's your niche? What's your vantage point in this work? Because this is such a broad umbrella of work, and we do a disservice to DEI when we kind of just parse it down to like one acronym that just means everything and anything to people. And so for me, if you were to ask me that question, I would say my lens and my vantage point and that of my business is around strategy, right? I want to help you to ensure that you're developing DEI programs for success for the future. So, and what I hear you asking is almost, what's the risk of not really investing in doing this in an intentional and strategic way, right? Yes. And so when we look at our DEI programs, these are quite literally stories. These are quite literally, things that are happening within organizations right now. So there are bigger companies, I won't name names, but you might have even seen in news cycles that there are bigger companies that have completely dissolved their DEI departments, who have laid off chief diversity officers, or who are no longer promoting or no longer sponsoring previous initiatives that they were under their umbrella of DEI work within their company. And what happens is there are a couple of things that have happened there. And I think the biggest thing is that they have not tied DEI back into the mission and vision of the organization. And so, I will forever stay on this soapbox, but strategy is key when it comes to DEI work. And the strategy is having a clear message, one that everyone throughout the organization can understand, with a well-articulated vision for how the work is going to be done. And third, it has to be connected back to the vision and mission of the organization, right? And so what can we latch onto from the strategic priorities of ABC company that would help us to understand that our DEI program is going to focus on X, Y, and Z? And that's the diligence. That's the real work, teasing that through, right? Combing through. Because if you are not intentional in this area, what happens is when new leadership comes and says, hey, I want to kind of focus more on tech development and kind of getting us into the AI space, and we don't have time for that DEI stuff anymore, then it gets on the chopping block. Or when we are facing financial pressures and we need to trim the fat, if you will, if we haven't done our diligence with our DEI programs, and let's say we have ERG groups or a DEI council that kind of never got executive sponsorship, that never made its way to a handbook, that never kind of got that support and structure that it needed, well, naturally, those are going to be the first things to go, because folks are trying to understand how we can continue to make business. Because at the end of the day, a business at their main goal, right, is to make money, save money, reduce risk. Like, those are the priorities. And if you cannot connect your DEI policies or ideas, initiatives, whatever you want to call it, but if you can't connect that back to the overall mission of the business, to save money, to make more money, to sell more products, one of those bigger priorities, what you've done is left DEI to feel like it's supplemental, kind of when we get to it. It's nice to have when we can, or, it's kind of over there in the ethers instead of being well integrated. And my firm wants to help you with the integration so that it doesn't face vulnerability of being on the chopping block as soon as your organization goes through a new change, because change is constant. And we're certainly in a period of time where there's lots of changes happening right now.
Yeah, I think you're laying out a great case for how to build a program, why it's important. But I guess that is a simple question. If I simplified it down for somebody who doesn't have a program like this, what would you tell them? Or if they're like, well, why should I? What are the benefits of a strong program like this?
Yeah. So when we think about the benefits, I think there are a couple of things. I think the first thing is that we're no longer in that space and place where we can tell an employee, you kind of leave everything at the door when you walk into the office and you're here to just do a job and to do a role. I think we've changed culturally and as a society about our expectations from the workplace, what we're hoping to get and we're hoping to experience. And I think unless you have a business where you're only working with robots, maybe that's the future, maybe it's not. But so long as we still work with people, we have a responsibility to better understand the needs of people. We do the same thing for our consumers, right? We do consumer studies and we study their purchasing patterns and where they buy, how they buy. Well, it's the same thing for our employees, right? We need to take a really critical look at what are the needs to keep and retain our people. If we know that our employees are the ones who are quite literally on the front lines with our stakeholders, be it clients, patients, you name it, you don't want disgruntled folks in front of your client. You don't want disgruntled folks in front of your consumer, because that's going to go back to your brand and reputation that you don't care, or you treat people like, whatever, insert the blank. You want to make sure that people feel like when I show up here, I know I matter. When I show up here, I know my voice matters. When I show up here and I have an idea, I know that someone's listening and that someone cares. I feel like at this place of work, I have the opportunity to advance in my career and to try new things and to reach new levels in my own professional journey. I feel like I have a team of folks who have a united vision for how we're going to serve and fulfill the vision of the organization. All those things are ideal, right? You want to keep, not only do you want to keep folks, but you want to keep them engaged. I'm not saying that you're buying loyalty, but you do want to make sure that the people that you're paying also are demonstrating at least as much as possible, higher levels of productivity and engagement, working in service of the mission of your business. But you need to take care of what they need as well. And so when we think about DEI, whether it's in promotion of employee resource groups or DEI councils, or if it's a supplier diversity program as an example, whatever that looks like for you on how you're going to posit the work, it has to be intentional, is what I would say someone who's kind of maybe just now entering the space. We have to be intentional. We have to be realistic. We have to be realistic with our resources. We can't compare ourselves, if we're a 100-person firm, to a firm with 100,000 and think we're going to have the same caliber of a DEI program that they have. That's just not realistic. So we have to really think about, what do we have access to? What are we hoping to accomplish? But then also, how does this tie back into our mission? How is an investment in workshop and trainings or a certification program or executive coaching, how is that going to make us better as a business? You have to be able to know that why as a team yourself. And then you invite voices in, like consultants or specialized experts in that area to help you to get there. But no one can answer that why for you. But you have to be able to articulate that. And a lot of the times, teams are looking at their leaders to be able to at least articulate the vision. And then we'll help you from there with what comes next.
It's really good advice. You mentioned ERGs. What are the benefits, and what have you seen from strong ERG programs? Do you ever hear of any pushback on those, or are those pretty much all upside?
Yeah, constantly.
And maybe we should start with, what is an ERG for listeners maybe that don't know?
Yes, thank you for that. I think that's really important and sensitive to acronyms. ERGs are employee resource groups. You might also hear them being called affinity groups. There are also business resource groups. So ERGs, BRGs, and affinity groups. And so depending on the nature of the organization that you're working for, the title might be different. And there are folks who arguably so would say kind of here's a distinction between, but quite literally, it's a gathering of folks with a shared cause, shared purpose, or shared experience, and that or can be and, right? And so you might see groups around parental status. You might see groups around ability status. You might be seeing groups around veteran status. But it's kind of galvanizing people who have shared experiences or shared goals, right? Things that they want to accomplish or do, or have similar backgrounds, and they kind of get together. And the space is meant to do a couple of things: to build community, and then also to see if, folks who are in that space can create opportunities to attract other folks who have same backgrounds, interests, or experiences, to see how we can pilot new programs and initiatives, right? So it just depends on kind of the group and what their objectives are. And so when we think about ERGs, certainly I think they are of value and a benefit within the organization. I do think that there are, of course, again, folks who would be in opposition of ERG groups and saying, why do we need those? Or how come they get to have those spaces? And so I don't think, personally, I'm a little biased. So I'm always going to be on Team ERG because I helped to formulate ones in my own professional experience. We've helped clients to establish their own, to get them rolling and going. So I'm always going to be Team Yes because I think they bring great value. But I do think there's a difference between a well-run ERG space and one that's probably not well-run. And the same thing that we've been saying, right? Intentionality, strategy. You have to know why you're gathering. What's the purpose of the group? Who is the group intended for? How frequently will we meet? What will we do during our meetings? Who's going to sponsor this group? And sponsor means like what executive is going to kind of put their name behind it. It's not just about money, but who's going to take the happenings of that group back to the executive level. And when those cabinet meetings are happening, give a report back like, this is what this group is up to. Here's what they're doing. Yeah. What's going to be the succession, right? A lot of the times we see folks who started in ERG groups and they say, well, I saw the need, so I wanted to launch it. I got the approval. I did it. And I've been here for 4 years and I'm tired, right? I'm the only one kind of keeping the ship going. And so the other thing we have to think about is when we think about our resources, it's personnel as well. Like there's no reason why somebody should be in an ERG position 4 years, 5 years. I actually don't think that's healthy, right? So how can we get new, fresh faces and ideas and have plans in place to get folks to come in? So there's a lot that you can do to create a really effective, both affective and effective ERG group. And I think that's what's important. So not necessarily should we or shouldn't we, but if we do, which I think they're of great value, being really clear on the why and implementing some best practices to keep it going in a really sustainable and impactful way.
And it seems to always go back to your first talking point, which is this idea of strategic planning, right? Everything you do needs to have intention, be strategic.
Yes.
Alyscia, where do you see, we've got time for just a couple more questions here.
Yeah.
Where do you see, what does the future of this sector look like? Where are we going? Where is it headed? How is it going to evolve, would you say, in the next year or two?
Yeah, I think there are lots of unknowns. I wish I had a crystal ball.
Yeah, I know.
I wish I had that crystal ball and I can tell you exactly. But I think there are going to be a lot of unknowns. And what I would say for folks who are engaged in DEI work is to not let the unknowns scare you. Because if you are really clear on your why, really clear on how the work connects back to your organization's mission, then that's how we kind of what we call future-proof the work, right? So for us as a firm, irregardless of whomever is elected as president, irregardless of, what pending lawsuits look like against this kind of work, for me and my firm, we're going to continue to be able to engage with our clients on conversations around strategy development for their people-focused initiatives. You see right there, I called it something a little bit different than DEI. Does that mean the work changed? No. It means that I have to be able to speak the language of where we're at currently, but I'm never changing the work that we're doing. Our work has actually never changed, maybe expanded a little, but never changed. But the way in which we articulate it has had to be a little bit more creative, and we have had to pivot because we know that there are folks who are afraid right now. And they're thinking, am I going to be able to keep my job? I mean, universities right now are dissolving their DEI offices. And so you have folks from higher education and corporations, right? All these spaces who are quite literally losing their jobs. And so when we talk about, well, how do we sustain this work? Yeah, you're going to hear me keep singing this through strategy. Strategy is what's going to help us through the test of time. We can't predict what forces and how the wind may blow, but what we can say is if we're really clear on our why and we've connected it back to how this work will enable our business to be better, more innovative, more competitive, better serving of our communities, then that's the diligence that we require, irregardless of what happens in the future.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of cheating, but I don't know.
No, it's fair. It's fair. Right. That's one of those questions that is, it's always great to get an answer though like that. I think it's perfect. Yeah. What, who do you, Alyscia, how do you stay fine-tuned in this space? Who do you look to for inspiration, resources, or advice? Who do you go to? Ooh. Or is this are you just kind of always pulling from your past experiences and your education, et cetera?
No, you don't want somebody who's only pulling from their own experience. No digs, but no. So I think plenty of sources and spaces of inspiration. One, I have a team of folks behind me. I work with a brilliant team, and I could not sing their praises enough. The scholars, practitioners, the consultants that I work with are so passionate, right, about seeing equity and seeing inclusion within the workplace. They'll tell me it's because I too am passionate and that's what attracts them to work with me. But I hope I tell them enough how much they inspire me,
Mm.
and how much I learn from them. So it's not just that I'm leading an organization and I'm just the knowledge holder of all things. I'm drawing from them just as much as they feel like they might be drawing from me. And then I also think there are a lot of folks that I'm in community with who are
Hmm.
doing the same work. So whether that might be other CEOs of consulting firms like mine, or folks who are doing this work within professional organizations, I think it's so important that we're in community with others. It helps the humanity aspect,
Yeah.
right? We get away from the keyboard, right? Folks who are real quick to jump on keyboards and make comments and say things, but it's like a lost art, a lost skill is being in community and dialogue with others. Even if we have different ideas, different opinions, how can we still, be in community with one another, even with our viewpoints, and listen and have empathy? So I make sure that I'm practicing what I'm preaching. And then lastly, I'll just say, I came from education as my former industry. And so I am just always a student, whether it be with my nose in a book, an audio book, a podcast. I'm on LinkedIn pretty frequently. I'm in programs of all sorts, but I'm constantly soaking in information because I want to know what's happening. I want to hear other people's vantage points, and I want to see other trends and see if there's things to pick up and better serve, because that's what's important to me.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap this up with this idea of, of advice. Speaking of learning, people are going to be here to learn. They're inspired. They're motivated by what you're saying. What do you want them to keep in mind? What are some takeaways that you want listeners to leave with in terms of this new wave of DEI, or the way that they frame it, tackle it, whether they should embrace it, run from it? What advice do you have for our listeners?
Yeah, I think I would say DEI work has certainly been in the news a lot, right? It can be
Mm-hmm.
almost what do you call it, where it's like what's that word? Oh gosh, I'm forgetting the word that I'm trying to say, but
Like there's a
um
lot of noise out there
a
around
lot of noise.
it.
Yeah, so it can be an area of work where there's a lot of noise around it. And I think as whether you're an organization, you're an individual, it's small, big, or large, just because there's a lot of noise doesn't mean that has to deter you from engaging and persisting. But I do think, if you're asking me for the three things, you have to be really clear on your why. Like, why are we even hoping to pursue equity and inclusion work? What does this mean for my organization? And how can we articulate that where everybody understands that purpose behind? So we want to have a really clear why. We want to understand what equity and inclusion and diversity work means to us as an org. I could think of a list of 100 different programs and initiatives that you can do in the name of DEI. And if you're not doing all 100, does that mean you're not really doing it, right? So we have to define what DEI means for our team, our organization, and how we're going to go down that path and journey. And then you might have guessed that last one, but it's to have a real strategy.
Mm-hmm.
The strategy is what's going to keep you on the rails. The strategy is what's going to help you when times get hard, when the budget gets smaller, when the economy looks different, when the leadership changes. The real strategy is what's going to help you to continue forward when it comes to the promotion of equity and inclusion at work. And so when you have that, it's a way to almost armor yourself for the times to come, because you never know. And you don't have to be beholden to also what's happening out there, right? You need to be mindful, but you don't need to be beholden. And so
That's
strategy
right.
is kind of that artillery, if you will.
It's great advice. Thank you so much. Really, that's why we call it inspiring perspective that you've got, Alyscia. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. We'll send people over to your website so they know where to find you, see the work that you're doing. Anywhere else you would send people that want to learn more about this topic or this space, or is that a good place to start?
Yeah, I mean, follow me, particularly our organization, or me on LinkedIn, because I tend to share a lot more of my ideas, vantage points, reactions to things that are happening in the news. I share a lot more of them in those spaces. So yeah, I would say those are good places to tap into, and that's just first name, last name on LinkedIn. And then also for our firm, ADR Consulting Group is our page handles for all of those channels. So yeah, would love to see folks in those spaces and comment and engage and we love to hear ideas and all of these. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, we'll put the links in the show notes. Alyscia, thank you so much for the work that you're doing, for all your insights. Appreciate you being here, and we'll keep an eye on all the great work you're doing, and hopefully we get you back over to thinkPARALLAX for some more talks or something, right? Thanks for being here, though.
Of course. All right, take care.
You too. Hey, thanks for checking out our show today. This show was produced by the team at thinkPARALLAX, a sustainability and communications agency with 2 decades of experience working with companies at every stage of the sustainability journey. We are experts at assessing where a company is today, defining a North Star, and developing a roadmap to get there. If your team needs sustainability guidance or training, or you have a recommendation for a guest or a topic on the show, visit us at thinkparallax.com. We'd love to hear from you.